Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 9 in CU 122. Chef Suzanne and I welcome you to another fine live session here at Escoffier. What a great week 8 was. Chef Suzanne and I were just talking about some of the pies, and I'm very looking forward to getting some feedback from everybody here in just a few moments about how they enjoyed the pie and what they picked up and what kind of learning took place during week 8. I'm sure it was fantastic. I do want to stress a little bit of concern for our on-time submission and our attendance rate in this class. We have noticed a dip recently, and we need to get back on the track as far as getting our assignments turned in early, not on time. On time is early. And we also need to make sure that we are posting attendance at least every 3 to 4 days. It's very, very critical. The reason we push for that so much is the students that do that are the ones that succeed 100% of the time, and our goal is to see each and every one of you succeed. So please work with us on that. It's for your future and for your benefit. Chef Suzanne, in the house with pies.
Seriously, House of Pie is definitely, it is just, I don't much care for blueberry pie. It's not one of my personal favorites, but this week I'm in desperate need of a blueberry pie. So anybody in my neck of the woods, I will let you know where you can drop that off because I'm gonna need that now. But we did have some major creativity with pies this week. I saw peach, strawberry rhubarb, mixed berries, apple. I saw all sorts of amazing, mostly blueberries, because that was what's in the recipe. I think I saw that more than anything. So let me share my screen so that you can see the awesomeness that I was able to see. All right, so I did make some notes here because I think these were probably the issues that I saw the most. So I figured this way I could kind of get it all in one place for everybody. Issues with measuring this week, because this week everything was in grams, which I knew threw some folks for a loop. So make sure that you're measuring your ingredients carefully and correctly. Don't overwork that crust, because then it can shrink. Because what I was seeing was beautiful pies, and then as soon as they came out of the oven, the crust was virtually gone. It had shrunk completely in because it was overworked ahead of time, and all that gluten developed, and poof, crust is gone. Don't add too much flour when you're rolling that out. You need just enough to keep it from sticking to your surface, and if you're moving it around quite a bit, you shouldn't need a lot of flour, and that extra flour makes stuff tough. Work quickly. I saw this happen a couple times too. If you let your pie crust get too warm, then what happens is you put it in the oven and it actually starts to melt, and anything kind of on the edge of your pan melts into your oven. So things have to be done really fast when you're dealing with that flaky crust with those beautiful, that butter does great things when it's right, but when it gets to room temperature or really warm before you put it in the oven, then all of a sudden you have sad pie crust that melted into your oven. I saw a few pies that had a lot of liquid, so the bottom crust stayed really soggy or just sort of oozed all over the plate. And that's from making sure that you get all that extra liquid out. And we don't want you like squishing all your little berries, but you still want to, get some of that excess moisture out, and make sure that you're also sealing the edge of your crust. And also make sure that your filling is thick before you put it in. Now, it doesn't need to be super, super thick, but if it looks watery when you put it in your crust, it's probably not going to thicken up enough to make a difference, because in most cases, it's actually going to thin down a little when the juice in those berries and that fruit starts to cook out. So those, I think, were probably the issues that I saw the most. So now on to the good stuff, the amazing photos, right? So the GBD on this pie that Jay made is amazing. And the side view, this is one of those ones where I went, I'm kind of feeling like a blueberry pie might be in my future. And look at that, Chef. I knew you'd appreciate it.
Wow.
Normally send that to you in advance, but I didn't see that one until today. She even braided her crust.
Luciana's got it going on. Look at that. That's gorgeous.
And it looks like some parts got more egg wash than others, so they got a little darker as it cooked. So I thought that was a really interesting take on it also. Lori's another one. This is like one of those side views of a pie that I went, okay, yeah, I'm kind of feeling some blueberries right now.
Great job, Lori.
Mm-hmm. Nicole also, hers, I just like to look at her mise en place. Nicole just does stuff with mise en place. It just made me go like, huh. It's like looking at a cooking show. And then on top of that, she made a gorgeous pie and put some whipped cream on top. So Nicole is a woman after my own heart.
Great job with the mise en place. That's fantastic.
Right? Here's one of the strawberry pies that I saw.
Great job on the lattice.
Isn't that nice? Oh yeah, they rocked some lattice this week. I saw a lot of lattice or fancy cutouts. So
Wow.
Sharon, right? So Sharon was like, oh no, not lattice. Let me get some cutters out.
Nice.
Right? Another gorgeous lattice. From Holly.
Fantastic job on that one.
Isn't that nice?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the last one I've got. I'm sure some more came in later that I haven't gotten a chance to add into my PowerPoint yet. But that definitely gives you an idea of what I had to deal with this week of looking at all that awesome stuff.
Wow. Let's talk to a couple of people about their feedback. Who wants to share how they liked doing the pies this week? Does anybody want to share? Anybody out there? Let's talk to Donna. What's up, Donna? Hi, Donna. We can't hear you. Donna. Donna? Try unmuting. Can you talk now, Donna? Let's come back to you. We'll come back to you. You get that fixed up, and then we'll work on that. Tonika, Scott, Morris, what'd you think about the pie?
I enjoyed the menu, or the recipe, but I didn't enjoy the blueberries. If I could have done like apples or something, I think I probably would have enjoyed the whole thing a little bit better. But I did do mine with chunks of vanilla ice cream sandwiches on top after I finished my pie.
Ooh. Now you're talking. Now you're talking. I've been one that always fancies the condiments to the ice cream, like the whipped cream and the ice cream that goes on the side. I love that. So, good comments. Thank you. Does anybody else want to share about their experience? What about Jose Juarez? What's going on, buddy?
I like the project. I think I cut my pie too soon because it started to bleed out a little bit.
It's kind of hard to wait, isn't it?
Yeah, and kind of that got.
Patience in the kitchen, especially when it comes to baking.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, cool. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. Donna, are you still trying to get going? Are you still muted?
Is it working now?
Yeah, go for it, Donna. Yay!
Awesome. Yeah, I was actually really sick this week, and I was like kind of airheaded. So I was really thinking I was gonna nail this one, but I know what I did wrong, and I knew I should have added more slurry or whatever it's called.
Oh, to tighten it up?
Yeah, I knew it, but I just didn't actually, think of, I don't know, going against the recipe, I guess I should say.
Right.
I wanted to follow the recipe. I was like, I don't want to do it wrong. I don't want to think I'm legit, but I was just like, follow the recipe, do it, and go rest. So I was actually surprised I did an okay job.
Oh, cool. Well, thank you for that comment. I do want to follow up on the slurry comment. It's really important when it comes to working with cornstarch water mixtures. Number one, make sure that water is very cold when you mix it with your cornstarch. And then number two, you have to make sure that your liquid is at a rapid boil while you're stirring that in. And then you should see it thicken very, very quickly at that point. Chef Suzanne made an interesting comment. If you put that pie in the oven you add the pie filling to the pie when the mixture is still loose, then yes, it's going to come out of the oven loose because it should thicken in the pan. So that's something everybody really needs to keep an eye on. And then another another issue that is really applicable to this week is measuring. Measuring is critical when it comes to baking, whether you're doing pie crust or French baguettes like this week. Please remember that your scales do convert from ounces to grams. So you don't have to go and convert anything because the scale will do it automatically for you. And if it asks for 125 grams of something, give it 125 grams of something, not 128, not 120, but 125. Because baking is a science, and you do need to pay very, very close attention to the recipe and the techniques being taught. Because once you vary and you start adding a little bit more, a little bit less, and everything else, that's when things go awry. So great job, everybody, on week 8 here in CU 122. It's been amazing progress so far that we've all been able to witness. I remember in week 1 when we were looking at Chef Suzanne's slideshow, and then what we're seeing here in week 8 has been an amazing progress. There's a lot of talent in this class, Chef Suzanne. Yeah, we're going to lose our jobs. Yeah, but great job. I mean, this is a lot of really good work. We're really impressed. And then also make sure that we're posting attendance and watching this live session. And I've also noticed a slight slip in the knowledge checks. Make sure that everybody's doing both knowledge checks, and don't forget that you can do those knowledge checks as many times as you like. So it's very, very important. Next, I want to talk about Chef Anna Sorten. We're not gonna watch this video unless we have time towards the end. But she is a great inspiration to any of you out there that are thinking about opening up your own restaurant or going into business for yourselves. She provides a very realistic look at the amount of work that it takes and the rewards that you get from doing all the hard work as well. So I would highly suggest that you take a moment to watch that video. That video is posted on our class page, and we'll take a look at that. Or not that video, but this PowerPoint is posted on your class page. So it is there for when you want to take a look at the video. Let's take a look at week 9 in CU 122. Research materials, everybody, that's where it's at. The whole success, if you can just take the time to read the research materials and understand them, and then complete your knowledge checks. Like I just mentioned, you can take those knowledge checks as many times as you like, and only the highest score will stick. Thank you, everybody, for being here at our week 9 live session. And if you're not, make sure you watch that live session archive. And then French bread, everybody, in the kitchen this week. I was reading a recent article about French baguettes, and in France, of all places. But it is a literal addiction. I think they bake close to 28 baguettes per person per year. So it is an amazing thing. They have a citywide competition in Paris for the Grand Master of French baguettes, with which people participate in for years and years trying to achieve that gold medal. So it is a very serious business. Your prep list this week, take it seriously. It'll make your week a lot easier. Live session on Wednesday. Read and understand research materials. Complete both knowledge checks on Thursday. Very, very critical. Read and understand assignment. Take the time to do it. I think sometimes we run into situations where we don't understand the assignment clearly. And by sitting down, reading the assignment before you even attempt it will make your life so much easier. Create yourself a prep list, timeline, and purchase mise en place. Do that on Friday. Be organized, ready to go. Prepare assignment, check against requirements, and submit it Saturday or Sunday, and boom, you're way ahead of the game. And then on Monday or Tuesday, when you get it back from Chef Suzanne, you're able to resubmit in plenty of time with all corrections as suggested. So, and then it says something down there at the bottom. What does that say, Chef Suzanne?
You know, after seeing all these pies, I thought I really couldn't suggest they make another pie, but these are the same basic steps to make an amazing pot pie. So chicken pot pie this week, or maybe some beef stew, or something similar as a pot pie. Y'all are pie pros now, so this is a great, segue into, you did the sweet pie, now try a savory pie. And if you do, we definitely want to see pictures.
Yes. Send us pictures of your pot pie. Yes. I saw Alvina up there holding her pie here just a second ago, and it looked absolutely fantastic. So great job on that pie there, Alvina. That looks wonderful. I like the lattice top. So thanks for sharing that with everybody. I appreciate that. So ladies and gents, don't forget your pot pie this week. Chicken pot pie is one of my most favorite foods. It's a wonderful comfort food. Now that we know how to make the pastry crust, I think in 101 you worked with Rue, so you're all set. Ladies and gents, weekly conversion chart is right here, ready to go. It'll help you out and walk you through all the steps. It'll make life very easy. I know you don't understand the conversions and the whole mentality behind it. Once you're in industry, you're going to be using that conversion chart quite a bit. It is a thing of memorization, so the more you do it, the better you will get. All right, everybody, let's move into the kitchen and get serious here. We're going to take a look at some different bread shapes that are very, very common. Bread is a staple of our diet and has been since the inception of time. This week is very, very important to reflect upon what you have learned about glutens, right? So we know that different flours have different levels of protein, and there are two proteins found in flour, glutenin and glutenine. And when you mix those with water and begin to knead, you develop strands of gluten. Chef Suzanne was talking about week 8 with our pie production and those pie shells shrinking because they were overworked. This week, it's a little bit of the opposite, because with bread, you need to develop that gluten structure. That's what will hold the bubbles. That's what will hold the shape of the bread. That's what traps the gases from the leavening agent, which is going to be yeast. But taking a look at some of the bread shapes, once again, this PowerPoint is on the class page for your convenience, so you can refer back to this. One of the most common ones that we work with is right here. This is called the Pullman loaf, and we actually have a Pullman pan that is used to do that. A Vienna roll, it's very close to a bolillo, like we use down in Mexico quite a bit for our tortas, very common. And then a bloomer loaf, which is a smaller loaf with slits along the top. Common dinner roll, and then we have a classic spiral roll right here. And then grissini. Grissini is one of my most favorite ones. A grissini is about 12 inches long, and it's only about ½ inch wide, and they can be very, very dry. And our baguette, Bentenar bread, challah bread, which is one of my most favorite ones. It's a traditional Jewish bread, and it's egg yolk based. It's absolutely fantastic. And then the epi loaves down here. For those of you that do get into a little bit of a higher ed facility, you'll probably end up working with epi loaves at one point in time. And then, of course, this week we're working on French baguettes. Very important. And there happens to be a kitty cat eating a French baguette right here on the PowerPoint. And Chef Suzanne is acting like she knows nothing about this.
I'm just saying that sometimes you just got to go with it, and sometimes you see one too many pictures of cute bread, and you just got to go with it.
Yeah, and you can't resist. I understand. All right, when it comes to making baguettes, a good baguette is going to have that crispy exterior. And it's going to be have a diameter of about 2 inches, and it's going to be about 25 inches long. So 2 inches by 25 inches is the traditional length and diameter. And sometimes you'll see them up to 3 feet or 36 inches long. And that crispy crust. And that crust is developed by having some form of moisture in the oven. A lot of ovens that we work with in industry have automatic steam injection into them. In the more modern ovens, we'll actually inject steam automatically at certain intervals, which will create that really crispy crust. So that is what a French baguette is. Just remember, it's crispy, soft in the center, about 25 inches long and about 2 inches in diameter. Is that how you would describe it, Chef Suzanne?
Yes, and I'm actually glad you're kind of going over that again, because what I see when I look at some of the assignments, when I start looking at them to grade them, is the one thing that sticks out is that they're not crunchy. And that means something somewhere did not go quite right. So that is a key kind of what you're really looking for. And most of us have seen, even some of the small grocery chains will have places, you know, little areas that make French bread. Hopefully you're lucky, you all live somewhere lucky enough to have some gorgeous bakeries to see really good French bread. I do not, but hopefully some of the rest of you do.
Yes, absolutely. So great words of advice. So make sure you keep an eye on that. Baguettes can be made from whole wheat, but traditionally they are made from bleached white flour. And that oven is very, very important. For the past couple of weeks, we've worked with ovens. We've done cookies, we've done pie shells, et cetera, et cetera. You should have a feel now for whether your oven burns cold or burns hot, right? So the temperature for the baguette is extremely critical. That is part of creating that crispy crust, that and the moisture. So let's take a look at a kernel of wheat and what it is. You know, a lot of people are under the assumption that they just go out, they get the kernel of wheat and they run it through a grinder and they put it into a bag, and that's not the case here. Traditionally, what we work with is called the endosperm, which is the center of the wheat. That has a very high level of carbohydrates and protein. Now, depending on the flour, if it is a pastry flour, they're going to use less of the endosperm, and once you get up into the bread flour, you're going to have a lot of that matter in there because that's going to increase the protein level. So that's something very important. Oftentimes during the production process, they'll remove the bran and they'll utilize that for something else. And then the germ, which is in the very center of the wheat kernel, is very high in vitamin E and vitamin B, and does have fat in there, which is extremely healthy. You know, a lot of us today have a tendency to avoid eating fat, whether it's from animals or from vegetables, because we were told that fat is bad. Please remember that fat is a necessary nutrient in the human body, and a lot of your vitamins and minerals that you consume are fat soluble. So you need to make sure that you stay in touch with those. Ladies and gents, let's switch over to gluten. How's everybody feeling about gluten? Do we understand it? Right? If anybody wants to do an interesting little exercise this week, it's kind of cool. If you take a small portion of the dough that you prepare, let it rest for a little bit, take it over to your sink, and then wash it under running water. And within a few minutes, you'll be left with what looks like a bunch of rubber bands all twisted and tied together. And that is the actual gluten structure that remains. And it's kind of a good visual aid to help you understand what's going on. We're going to take a quick look here at gluten once again. Gluten refers to the proteins in the wheat, barley, and rye. That's primarily where the gluten proteins are found. And then, as we mentioned, the gluten or the glutenin and the glutenine are actually found in the endosperm, which is the very center of the wheat kernel. And then that gluten affects the elasticity of the dough. Whenever I think of gluten, I always think about the walls in a house and the floor, because that's what holds the whole structure together. So it's an extremely important part of what we do. We saw that this past week where we overworked our pie dough, and when it cooked, those gluten shrank and sucked everything in. So this week, it's the opposite. You want to have a good gluten development in there in order to hold that structure. So it's very, very important. How many of you are familiar with yeast? Yeast, Tanika, Alvina. See a couple of you out there shaking your heads. Yeah, Donna, okay. Ladies and gents, yeast is extremely important. It is a member of the fungus kingdom, and there are several different varieties of yeast that we work with. And the most popular is going to be the active dry yeast. It's very small granules, maybe like a little bit bigger than table salt, a little bit bigger than smaller than a poppy seed. And all it really needs is warm water to activate. So for those of you that are working with active dry yeast this week, which is the most common, you want to work with water. Please follow this. This is critical. You want to work with water that is between 90 and 100 degrees. That is what we refer to as being tepid water, T-E-P-I-D. At 110 degrees, you run the risk of killing the yeast, okay? So you want to stick between 90 and 100 degrees, and you want to stir and dissolve that yeast. Within a couple of moments, you will notice a head developing on top of the liquid, and you will also have a light alcohol smell coming from that yeast. That means that the yeast has been activated. Active dry yeast gives off carbon dioxide and alcohol. That is the gas that causes the bread to rise. Instant yeast is another common type of yeast that we use. It does not need to be added to liquid or to be dissolved either. It's smaller in size than the actual active dry yeast, and it can be added directly in without dissolving it first. Like I said, active dry yeast is going to be the most common in industry. It's traditionally sold in 1-pound bags. If you do open your yeast, make sure that you do refrigerate it afterwards because it is very temperature sensitive. It is a live organism, so be very, very careful there. So those are the two primary forms of yeast: active dry, which you will see a lot of in industry, and then the instant yeast, which you might run into in the grocery store, that type of thing. Anything to add, Chef Suzanne, about yeast?
Actually, I have a question. The recipe for the French bread actually calls for instant yeast. So should they use the exact same amount, or is there any sort of conversion that you would like them to do?
They're pretty much 1-to-1 as far as any type of conversion is. If you're going to use active dry yeast, you just need to dissolve it in the amount of water first. It's pretty much that simple when it comes to switching them back and forth. Remember as well, in the commercial kitchen or at your home, you want to make sure that you're very clean when working with that yeast. Don't have any electric fans blowing. Don't have any windows open or anything else, because you don't want that yeast flying around in your kitchen. Wherever it settles, if there is moisture and warmth, that yeast will begin to grow mold or fungus. And so you need to be conscientious of that as well. Ladies and gents, let's take a look at a couple of very important pieces of industry equipment that we work with. So traditionally in industry, to cook the French baguettes, you would be using a convection oven. Remember that a conventional oven does not circulate the air, whereas a convection oven does circulate the air. And then sheet pans, and we've talked about this a bunch of times in this class. Woo! Chef Suzanne, how many sheet pans have you carried over the years?
Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine how many sheet pans I have moved. We went camping. We have sheet pans in our camper. I have a bunch of sheet pans in I probably own 15 sheet pans at my house.
Yeah, all of you will become very familiar with those shortly. Yes. And then parchment paper, we talked about this last week as well. This is a really interesting thing. In the commercial industry, this is what we cook our baguettes on. This is a baguette pan that would go on top of the sheet pan. You'll notice that it is perforated, and you'll lay your dough right on top of that. You'll allow it to proof, and then onto the sheet pan, and then right into the oven. Silk mats as well, which are a great replacement for parchment paper. And then this week, if you are using a stand mixer, make sure you use a dough hook. That is what you'd want to be working with. And then it's also, once you're in industry, you're also going to be exposed to what we call a proof box or a proof cabinet. And they stand about 6 feet tall. They can be about 24 inches wide. And on the bottom, there's a small pan of water. That small pan of water is warmed, it creates humidity. They're kept between 90 and 100 degrees, which is the ideal proofing environment for bread. So you'll be able to proof 30, 40, 50, 60 baguettes all in a single shot. Do we have any questions so far? Chef Suzanne, anything to add?
Not yet. Got one question that I'll get to when you get to that part. I'm just trying to like keep it in my brain so I don't forget.
Okay, that works for me. All right, ladies and gents, let's take a look at our recipe for this week. French bread, it's a straight dough. That means you mix everything together. You're not doing this in stages, so to speak. You notice up here that everything is in grams. I did mention at the beginning of the class that your scale does convert. This recipe is on the class page, so you'll have everything laid out nicely for you to understand. You're going to combine all your ingredients in a bowl and mix with a rubber spatula until dough forms. It does not need to be smooth. Let it rest for 1 hour. So in other words, you don't have to stand there. If you're mixing this by hand, don't beat yourself up for the next 2 to 3 hours trying to get all of the lumps out of it. It's not absolutely necessary. It will come out. Then you're going to lightly dust your work surface with flour. Chef Suzanne brought that up at the beginning of the class as well. Lightly dusting. That dust of flour is to perform a thin layer between your work surface and your bread so it doesn't stick. If you need to add more, but don't start with too much because you know what? You can't take the flour out once you get it in there. It's kind of messy, right? And then you're going to put that dough right on to your workbench. Dough scraper, we had this a couple of weeks ago, was in the weekly presentation. It's a small white piece of plastic with a slightly curved bottom. Great tool to get. They're about, how much are those things, Chef Suzanne? 75 cents or $1?
They're not much. I think, did y'all's kits come with one?
Do you guys have a dough scraper in your kits now? Okay. Yeah, this would be the ideal opportunity to use that. And then you're going to stretch it out into a rectangle and fold itself into thirds. And then return the dough to the bowl, let it rest for about another 30 minutes. And then you're going to do that a couple of more times. And when they say stretch it out, and then fold it into thirds. Does that make sense to everybody? So you're going to pull it out, you're going to stretch it out into a rectangle, and then fold it into thirds. And that is also what we call punching down, or a form of punching down that releases all the gases and allows new gases to continue the fermentation process. Or if you would like, you can place the dough in a plastic bag and let it ferment overnight in your refrigerator. Now, word of caution, that yeast does not turn off as soon as you put it into the refrigerator, okay? So it's going to keep making itself happy in there. So if you don't wrap it properly and enclose it, guess what you're gonna get inside your refrigerator? One big loaf of French bread. Yeah. You ever had that happen, Chef Suzanne?
Fortunately, no.
I have. Yeah, several times. And ladies and gents, if you don't want to do that, you can just put that French bread after you've folded it into the book fold a couple of times. You can put that French bread into a bowl, lightly oil the bowl, just very lightly, just enough so it won't stick. Put the French bread in there, cover it with a cloth, and it can sit out on your tabletop for a couple of hours to finish the fermentation process. Your dough is going to be divided out into 290 gram pieces. That'll be enough to make one baguette each. And then we're going to talk about the shaping of the baguette here in just a few minutes. When it does go into the sheet pan for the final proof and before baking, make sure that they are spaced out pretty good, 3 to 5 inches, because they do grow. And if you don't space them out properly, you're going to have one big happy family on your sheet pan there of French bread. Preheat oven to 450 degrees. The heat is critical when it comes to making baguettes. If you bake this at 300 degrees or 350 degrees, you're not going to get that good crispy crust like we were talking about. So very, very important. And something else you have to do, you saw the baguettes, the pictures of them, they have the slits on the top. Before they bake, you're going to take a sharp blade and you're going to make incisions on a diagonal that are approximately 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch, no more than that. It doesn't need to be all the way through. 1/8 to 1/4 inch, make those slits right across the top, and as it bakes, it will give you that nice open presentation. one big hint with French bread, once you've reached that GBD, golden brown and delicious in your oven, you're going to tap on it. It should sound hollow at that point, and then you should smell it. And you should no longer have that alcohol smell from the yeast. That means all the yeast is cooked off. And then when it comes out of the oven, make sure that it goes onto a rack, not onto a countertop, because it's still releasing moisture and you're going to have soggy bread if you do that. So you want to make sure that you allow it to cool on a rack. Very, very important. Any comments, Chef Suzanne?
I'm just going to definitely second that cooling rack, or something that you can use or that you can rig up to be a cooling rack. Like Chef was just saying, when it sits, if your bread just sits on a flat surface, it can get soft, it can get soggy, it can create moisture. So even if you've got to take your baguette and maybe flip a couple bowls or something upside down and just set them in between, just so that as much of it is open as possible. So get creative if you don't have a cooling rack, but I adore my cooling racks, and I got them at Walmart. They were like $10 and there's 3 of them. So definitely something that I know I use all the time for many other purposes, like for draining product when I'm deep frying, for cooling breads, for cooling cookies. So definitely something you want to think about. But if not, get all like Bill Nye the Science Guy, try and figure out what you can do to kind of like figure out a way to make it work.
Yep. Essential piece of kitchen equipment. All right, ladies and gents, let's take a look at this quick video here about the process of the French bread. I love this guy over here on the side. This baguette with the palette there. Very, very nice.
He is a French bread.
Yeah, a French man with French bread.
French bread is a straight dough and a simple combination of flour, water, yeast, and salt. That's it. 4 ingredients. When combined and allowed to ferment, they produce wonderful smells, flavors, and textures. The straight dough method mixes ingredients into a smooth, uniform dough. Gluten, a protein in wheat flour, is developed through time and agitation. The dough becomes stronger the more gluten you develop, and it's something you can feel when you manipulate the dough. To start the French bread, mix the ingredients all together by hand to a shaggy dough. It doesn't have to be smooth to the touch. Yeast, the salt, and then it's a good idea to just kind of mix it together a little bit to kind of disperse the ingredients. Then the water. You can mix it right in the bowl. You'll start to see gluten starting right away, but it won't be fully hydrated until we get finished mixing. Then clean off your scraper and go back to it. You'll see that some parts are very dry and some parts are still very, very wet. We're going to make it still shaggy, but a little more uniform. Then you can pretty much hold it in your hand. Just round it roughly, put it in the bowl, and cover it with plastic.
So the yeast is giving off the alcohol and the carbon dioxide now, and you're allowing it to work.
Keep it covered with plastic wrap to rise for an hour. When you're ready for your stretch and fold, release the plastic. It might stick a little bit to the dough. That's okay. And again, don't have to be fancy about it. You're just going to release the dough from the bowl. But you can see that you've really started to develop a lot more gluten just by letting the dough sit by itself. Stretch the dough out, and again, resist the temptation to put any flour down on the bench. You don't need it. You're going to stretch it out to a rectangle. Let it sit for a moment to relax it. Then you're going to fold it in thirds. Fold it this way, and then start stretching it out again. You're also kind of redistributing the yeast and the water in the dough. You'll start to see the gluten forming even more as you stretch it out. Round it before you put it back in the bowl. Cover the dough with plastic and let it rest overnight. For the dough to rise faster, let it rise for 3 hours at room temperature. After the fermentation is done, you'll see the dough has doubled in volume. This is the result of the CO2 gas from the yeast expanding the dough. Using a plastic scraper, remove the dough from the container. Then divide the dough into 250-gram pieces using the scraper. Don't use a knife and don't just tear it. Each one of these is a unit. Release the gas in the dough a little bit too. You'll have a lot of gas left over no matter what. And I'm at 285 there. I want to be pretty accurate, but if I'm within 5 grams, I'm okay. There we go. I'm going to round all these doughs. What you can also do when you pull up the dough, kind of just stretch it like so in your hands. And what you're trying to do is pull the dough towards the center. You can use the table if your hands are a little small. Round the units and let them rest for 5 to 7 minutes covered with plastic. The plastic doesn't have to be tight on top. After resting, which is called benching, stretch one of the pieces to a rectangle about 3/4 inch thick. Fold it down and seal it with the palm of your hand. So this is the rounded side. This is the ugly side. We want the rounded side down. Stretch it out. Let's get about 1/3 of the dough this way and seal it with the heel of your hand. The heel of your hand can be very forceful, but it's also very gentle. Turn it around and do the other side. Run your thumb along the seam to seal that seam. I'm pushing into the dough as with my thumb, and I'm sealing it with my right hand. And then seal the final dough with the heel of your hand on the bench. With open fingers, stretch the dough out and taper the ends. It will stretch back a little bit, that's okay. But it should be about 12 to 17 inches long. We're going to look for the seam, which is right here. We're going to put that on the bottom and then place it on the tray. Once the units are shaped, you're going to cover them with plastic. And you're going to let them sit until they double in volume. While this is happening, preheat the oven to 500 degrees. When the units have doubled, slash with a razor blade or a knife using long overlapping cuts, about 1/4 inch deep. Don't worry about a little deflation at this point. It'll bounce back once it gets in the oven. Place the slash units in the preheated oven for 30 minutes. The crust should look uniformly brown when it's done. Test the doneness by weighing each unit. Each unit should weigh between 200.
So that's basically the baguettes in a nutshell. We're going to take another look at the shaping process here real quick, because I think we have some stumbling blocks in that area. That is one of those things that does take a little bit of practice. You'll notice he did not spend a lot of time mixing. Those glutens do develop through the fermentation process while the yeast is giving off the gases. You'll also notice that he was using his bench scraper to mix, because that's a great way to avoid using your hands and getting them all clotted up. He did make a very interesting comment saying, don't add flour to your work surface if you don't need it, because you don't want to add additional flour. We did see the shaping process. We'll get back to that here in just a minute. And then make sure those 1/4 inch cuts on the surface are done after the bread has proofed, doubled in size, and right before it goes into the oven. Does anybody have any questions so far? Chef Suzanne? Anybody have any questions?
I don't think so.
Okay. Cool. Well, let's take a quick look here on how to shape the baguette, because I want to make sure everybody gets this part down. That's real super important. Don't forget, French bread is a straight dough. Everything in the bowl, add the water, mix it till it's shaggy, let it rest, pull it out, book fold, and then let it proof, portion it, sell it. It's that simple. Ladies and gents, only flour the cutting board if absolutely necessary. Very, very important. All right, ladies and gents. So I think we now all have a pretty good understanding of how we're going to shape that dough. It's pretty critical. Don't forget the part about watching the seam. That's extremely critical because that will greatly affect the aesthetics of the dough. So that's very, very important. Chef Suzanne, you said you had a question.
I do. It was a really good student question for those that were reading and paying attention to what was going on about steam being important in making baguettes and making really crunchy bread. And well, how do we do that if we don't have ovens that can inject steam? And so I just wanted to let you kind of hit on that. I know one thing for sure is you need to make sure that your oven is the right temperature. Because I know that we did have run into that. A lot of folks ran into that with some of the other items where their oven wasn't cooking quite high enough. And so we saw pale cookies. So you'll see really sad, pale, undercooked bread. So this is definitely one that you want to make sure that your oven is super hot. And there are some ways, and Chef will probably talk about that, there are some ways to add some steam a little bit. It's never going to be quite as good as if you have an oven that can inject steam, but you may be able to have some like kitchen tips for at home. Chef, you got some for them?
A couple of things we do in industry is number one, we use a squirt bottle or a spray bottle. And you have to remember, you're not trying to recreate the rainforest in there. You know, there's no iguanas or parakeets. You know, we're not worried about that. We don't need that much humidity. Probably to cook your French bread for these recipes, you're probably talking right around a half cup of water. So a couple of squirts with a spray gun would be perfectly fine. If not, keep it simple. Take a saute pan, put that half cup of water in there, put it on the bottom of your oven. And during the cooking process, with your oven being at 450 degrees, water steams at 212, you'll have that effect taken well care of. So it's a lot more simple. Don't overcomplicate it. Just put a small pan with some water in there, and that steam will be generated. Good question, though. That's fantastic.
Another one, and I know that during this block we've seen and heard, I know we got a lot of cast iron fans. This is a really good use for your cast iron. Put that cast iron pan dry, empty, in your oven on the bottom, and then put your bread in, and then put some boiling water, just a little, in that cast iron, and that'll make steam pretty quick. Like Chef said, you don't want a lot, because too much moisture is going to be bad. It's like, it's good to a certain point, and then all of a sudden, oh, all that extra steam is bad. So there's like a little fine line for your steam. So good use for your cast irons.
Less is more. And by the way, ladies and gents, we have been talking about oven calibration here for the past couple of weeks, and not knowing or knowing. Oven thermometers are extremely inexpensive. They're widely available at Walmart, restaurant supply stores, Amazon.com, Target. A lot of grocery stores sell them as well in their houseware section. It is probably about $2 to $3 for an oven thermometer, which just hangs from your rack, and that will give you a good idea of where you're at. This week, the recipe is calling for 450 degrees. I would highly recommend that you keep it at least at 450 for this project. Ladies and gents, taking a look at our assignment page this week. Info for week 9. Chef Suzanne is requesting that you rename your photos. Very, very important. So instead of pick 3 or pick 2 or pick 1, whatever your system automatically assigns it as, rename it. You can right-click on the title, and it'll either say properties or rename, and then you click on that, and then you can write what that picture is. Mise en place, for example, or bread proofing as required in the rubric. So you just, each photo is required. So for example, units portioned, cut, and scaled, and covered. You would take a picture of that, and then you would rename it as that. And this way, when Chef Suzanne is taking a look at your assignment, she'll have a clear understanding of what you're talking about. Is that correct, Chef Suzanne?
Yes. The reason that I want them renamed in this assignment is because if you think about what you're taking pictures of, it's a little hard to see, but dough mixed, dough after, so it's like a lot of very similar photos, and sometimes there may be an issue. And if I can't tell, because as you know, sometimes your photos, you've all seen this, your photos end up in a perfect order, exactly how you took them. And a lot of times they don't, because your phone or your computer gives them just some random number that it pulls out of thin air, I guess. And so they never really end up in the right place. So it makes it a lot easier for me to see what's going on if you just rename it. And you don't have to give it any sort of crazy name. Like I said, you can just name it picture 3, if that's what the list says, or you can name it mise en place, or you can name, you know, just because it makes it a lot easier. If not, you may even end up sending me the same picture more than once, and that's not, you know, they should be, they're similar, but they're not exactly the same. So you need to make sure. So you don't have to rename your photos from here on out. It's a good habit to get into. But this is one where it will really make it a lot easier for me to see what's going on if you name the photos. Some of you already do that, so no worries.
Absolutely. Great suggestion. And don't say you are not a baker. I couldn't agree with that more. We know you're not a baker. You're in culinary school, and you know what? You're learning a great technique that you will utilize a lot in industry. And you know, good bread making is something like anything else. It takes a little bit of time to master it. And now's a great time to start practicing, because you've learned the technique. Now you can just start mastering the technique and moving forward. Taking a look at this week's assignment, make sure that self-identification photo is looking good. Make sure your sanitizing bucket, that's critical once you get into industry. Get in the habit now. And then all of your required pictures are right here. And I am so forward to looking at all that. Chef Suzanne.
Yes. Picture number 4 talks about your dough mix for 4 minutes on slow and 4 minutes on fast. You do not have to do that, because there was an error somewhere where that was put in here. So the recipe and the steps don't even and the video don't even show a mixer. So don't worry about picture 4. So just show your other steps for your bread, but you don't have to worry about that because you won't need a mixer for this.
Absolutely. Great catch, Chef Suzanne. So
that they caught it because they're awesome.
They are awesome, aren't they? We are lucky to have such good students, I think. Yeah. We've had a lot of blocks together, and I think this is one of the better classes. So we're really, really happy. Ladies and gents, don't forget, let's get all of our assignments in on time. We're dropping a little bit in that area, so we need to step it up, reach out to your fellow students. Let's get everything in on time. Culinary arts is a team effort, so we can all do that. I know we're all capable of it. Make sure that we're posting attendance at least every 3 to 4 days. It is critical to your success. We want to see everybody succeed. Does anybody have any questions before we wrap it up? Anyone? Ladies and gents, you guys rock. Have a great week. We look forward to some great French baguettes. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye, everybody.